The glass conference room on the third floor still smelled like a mix of pasteurized milk and whatever expensive perfume Chloe had sprayed before stepping on stage. The fluorescent lights bounced off the polished steel floor below. The production line hummed steadily. Through the glass, I could hear the low rumble of the boilers, steady, dutiful, almost comforting. If people worked as precisely as those machines, maybe the world would be quieter. I'm proud to announce our new director of quality, my talented daughter, Chloe Mercer. Grant Mercer raised his champagne glass, voice firm and confident, like he was making a declaration for mankind. The applause rang hollow, like tin. I didn't clap. My coffee was still hot, the steam brushing my cheek. 10 weeks. She'd been here 10 weeks. Below us, white milk streamed through stainless pipes, every drop falling perfectly in rhythm, flawless, honest, unlike people. I sat still, spine straight, eyes fixed on the glass, as if watching myself being molded out of cold metal. Chloe stood beside her father, smiling that mirror-practiced smile. I'm truly grateful to my dad, and especially to Nora, the one who's guided me. I hope to keep learning from you. I nodded slightly, lips curving into the kind of polite smile you wear when you're being buried alive. Around the room, colleagues nodded too. Some glanced at me, sympathy and fear mixed in their eyes. Everyone knew I'd been running this system for 3 years, rewriting every procedure after the 2021 recall. No one said a word. Marie, the senior secretary, hesitated as she replaced the nameplate Nora Whitfield with Chloe Mercer. Her hand trembled just a little. Grant glanced at me, that blend of guilt and satisfaction. He lifted his glass again. We'll continue to grow with a youthful vision. Chloe will bring the innovative spirit this company needs. Innovative spirit. It sounded like a slogan printed on a break room poster. I took another sip of lukewarm coffee. The paper cup crinkled softly. When the ceremony ended, Chloe walked over, her voice syrup sweet. Could you help me finalize today's batch reports? I'm still getting used to the compliance software. That software is called FDA compliance, Chloe. Oh, right. She laughed, nodding quickly. I smiled back, a pulse tightening in my neck. Let's hope so. She left, heels tapping with the cheerfulness of someone who's never been wrong in her life. When the door closed, only the machines kept speaking. I moved closer to the glass. Below, the plant breathed like a giant body inhaling milk and exhaling steam. In the last batch, one milk bottle bulged, its metal cap slightly domed, catching the light. To an outsider, it was just a pressure glitch. To me, it was a warning. I placed my hand on the glass. My reflection blended with the moving line behind it, pale, still, silent. It bulged because the heat cycle was wrong. Just like this room, full of trapped air no one wanted to notice. Everyone else had left. I stayed, listening to the sterilizer's hiss, a rhythm more honest than any of the congratulations earlier. On the table, the champagne glasses still shimmered. Bubbles rose and burst exactly like my trust in this system. I turned away and walked down the hallway. The fluorescent lights illuminated every slogan on the wall. Quality is our legacy. Excellence through family leadership. I let out a quiet laugh. Family, they called it. Here, the milk gets tested more thoroughly than the people. My office smelled faintly of bleach. On the desk sat 3 shipment files waiting for signatures. A blue pen lay beside a glass vial of samples. I opened batch L27. Everything looked normal except for one note. Labeling delay, 3 minutes. No one would care. I did. 3 minutes can mean the difference between safe and statewide recall. The door opened. Marie peeked in. Grant wants you to sign before the trucks leave. Chloe asked if you could check the temperature. I didn't look up. She can check it herself. Marie sighed. He said it'd help with a smooth transition. Transitions are never smooth. People just pretend not to hear the cracking sound. The door closed quietly. The bulged bottle still sat under the light, its surface reflecting a thin silver line. Pressure is building inside. 1 more degree, and the cap would pop. I picked up my phone and took a photo, not for evidence, for memory. In the frame, my face blurred behind the bottle. 2 things caught under the same pressure. They thought I'd stay silent. They forgot that silence is also a chemical reaction. I signed the report and added a single note beneath my signature. Pending review, temperature verification required. Polite, harmless. But to the right eyes, it would be a signal. I turned off the lights. The hallway glow slipped through the doorway. The bottle gleamed once, trembled, then stilled. I drew the blinds open, letting the winter gray of Wisconsin spill in. The sky outside was flat and cold, like a blank page waiting to be written on. The day had said enough. The rest, I'd let the numbers speak. And when numbers speak, people have no choice but to listen, whether they want to or not. I once thought I'd stay at Dairy Pure until my hair turned gray. 3 years ago, when the 2021 milk recall sent the entire state into chaos, I was the first to walk into the crisis room, not to find who was at fault, but to stop the bleeding. They called it the listeria leak. Thousands of cartons destroyed, 3 children hospitalized, and Grant stood in front of cameras saying, "We'll treat this as a learning opportunity." And me, I didn't sleep for 9 nights. I rewrote every single inspection protocol from 161 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds to pH thresholds, then retrained every operator by hand. Every morning, I showed up before 5, standing in the fog of rising milk steam, checking temperature myself, inspecting seals, signing off with my blue pen, only when everything was perfect. One small deviation, and thousands of children could get sick. I never let that happen. Grant doesn't remember, Chloe doesn't know, but the records still carry my signature. Verified, no deviation. Those long nights I came home after midnight. Caleb, my husband, was still awake, sitting in his wheelchair, holding a book he hadn't turned a page of, eyes tired but warm. "You've worked too much, Nora, I know. But if I don't, who's going to pay for the therapy?" After the accident, he barely spoke. He lost both legs at a construction site 3 years ago. The insurance covered half the rehab equipment. The rest was on my back. In the corner, my daughter Emma, 10 years old, looked up from her homework. "Mom, why don't you ever eat dinner with us?" I smiled. "Because I'm making sure someone else's breakfast is safe." She believed it. She thought her mom was saving the world. Caleb looked at me. "Does the company pay you extra for that?" "No." "Then why keep doing it?" "Because no one else will." Outside, the winter wind howled through the vents. Albuquerque was dry and cold, and I opened my laptop in the small kitchen, the light glinting off Caleb's prosthetic legs, steady, unyielding. I used to joke, around here, they call quality control sending motivational emails. I call it measuring every sterilization second precisely. Caleb laughed. Only you could find romance in a number. The truth is, I didn't. I was scared. Scared someone might miss a detail and turn it into a headline. Scared that one day I'd be too tired to double check, and some child would end up in a hospital because I trusted someone else. Grant once said, "Nora, you have a tendency to be extreme." I said, "If food safety is extreme, then I'll stand at that edge." 3 years passed. I became someone everyone at the plant knew, not to cross, not to underestimate. They called me Iron Nora. I didn't mind. At least iron doesn't bend easily. But inside that small house, I wasn't iron. I was a wife watching the news beside her husband, a mother telling her daughter bedtime stories about the woman who keeps milk safe for the world. The difference is, the world doesn't know she exists. Once, Emma broke a glass and burst into tears. I knelt down, picking up the shards. Blood welled on my palm. "Does it hurt, Mom?" I smiled. "It's fine. I'm used to it." Sometimes I said the same thing to myself. I got used to my work going unnamed, used to silence, used to know that one small mistake could erase years of labor. Every time I signed a report, I thought about that. Every stroke of the blue pen was a promise. Not to Grant, not to the company, but to Emma, to every child drinking a morning glass of milk. One February night, the plant sent out a sensor alert. I drove there through freezing wind. "I thought it was a false alarm," said the young technician. "Next time, don't think." When I got home, the clock said 3 in the morning. Caleb was still awake. "I thought you'd work until the factory slept," he said. I took off my coat. The factory never sleeps. Only the people guarding it get tired. I don't know when I started writing everything down in blue ink. Temperatures, pressure, operator names. The notebook thickened, pages yellowing over time. I called it the log of conscience. Marie once joked, "If you ever quit, who dare sign those papers?" I just smiled. If someone dares to sign for me, they'll dare to skip safety too. Those 3 years brought no medals, just calloused hands, cold nights, and endless hospital bills. But whenever I heard the sterilizer hum, steady, honest, I felt peace. Because at least one thing in my life still ran exactly as it should. I didn't need thanks. All I ever wanted was for people to remember this. Sometimes, silence is the reason the world stays safe enough to drink a glass of milk. That night, the city was silent. Only the old heater made a faint ticking sound, like a tired heart struggling to keep rhythm. I brewed a cup of peppermint tea, the only thing strong enough to drown out the smell of disinfectant and unpaid bills. On the table, the swollen milk bottle sat quietly, a witness made of glass and pressure. The desk lamp cast a silver streak across it, like a crack in metal. I set the teacup beside it. Both gave off steam, one warm, one toxic. I opened my laptop. The blue glow spread across the wall, uneven, alive. The cursor blinked, like it was urging me to write. Dear Mr. Mercer, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from my position as Senior Quality Manager at Dairy Pure Foods. I paused, took a sip of tea. My hands didn't shake. There was only the calm sharpness of someone who knows exactly where to strike the match. The letter was half a page. No blame, no drama. Thank you for the opportunity. Wishing the company continued success, effective in 2 weeks. But behind that envelope, I slipped another document. I titled it, Food Safety Memo, Withdrawal of Authorization under FDA Clause 4.2.1b. The last 3 batches had small deviations. Temperature off by 0.8 DGF, pH above tolerance by 0.3, and sealing was delayed a few seconds. To anyone else, harmless. To me, a warning sign. I typed, per clause 4.2.1b of the FDA code, I hereby withdraw my authorization signature from batches L27, L28, and L29 due to incomplete temperature validation and deviation exceeding allowable tolerance. A single paragraph, but enough to stop a production line. I added by hand, documentation retained for verification. Then whispered, keep it short. People don't read long. But when the FDA reads, they read every word. The printer hummed in the quiet room, the sound like a heartbeat recording the truth. I signed, folded, and sealed it in a white envelope. On the front, I wrote by hand, to Grant Mercer, confidential. I stood up, looked at the bottle one last time. I don't need to speak. The system will speak for me. The next morning, the sky was thick with fog. I arrived early, and the parking lot was still empty. I placed the envelope on Marie's desk. For Grant. Confidential. She blinked. Everything all right, Nora? Better than ever. As I walked past the lobby, I saw Chloe through the glass wall, giving a presentation. Her lips shaped pretty, empty words. Innovation, efficiency. She had no idea that downstairs the sterilizers were holding a secret big enough to choke their empire. By afternoon, an automatic system reply appeared in my inbox. Your memo has been archived under regulatory compliance. A cold line of text, but I knew what it meant. My memo had gone straight into the FDA liaison system, where nothing can be deleted or ignored. One inspector reading that line, and every shipment would be held. I wasn't exposing them. I was simply withdrawing my signature, and in this business, that alone is enough to paralyze an entire operation. That night, when I came home, Caleb was on the porch. Another long day? He asked. No, I said. Today was short. He looked at me, half worried, half understanding. You just did something I should be concerned about, didn't you? I poured him tea and smiled. No need to worry. I just pulled the brake at the right time. Emma ran out and hugged me. Mom, you're home early. I kissed her hair. milk and tea mixed in the air. For the first time in months, I felt my chest unclench. Late that night, I opened my log of conscience. Between rows of numbers, I added one short line. Day 1. Authorization withdrawn. No noise, just precision. I set the notebook back on the shelf. Outside, the wind howled through the vents, carrying the faint hum of the factory. But tonight, it sounded different. The rhythm wasn't steady anymore. Something small had been pulled out of the machine. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Marie, voice trembling. Nora, Grant just read your letter. I'm guessing he didn't like it. Didn't like is an understatement. He threw his glass against the wall. I looked out the window and smiled slightly. Then the system's working as designed. I reopened the FDA code file. There was one line Grant had never bothered to read. Once authorization is withdrawn, revalidation must be conducted under independent supervision. He couldn't replace my signature with anyone else's. He'd have to bring in an outside inspector, and when they came, they'd audit everything, including the past. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the wind slip through the blinds. For the first time in months, I heard the most peaceful sound of my life, the silence of a system beginning to hold itself accountable. Before bed, I cleared my desk and placed a fresh envelope on top. No more letters to send. My part was done. The rest would run its course. I turned off the lights. Streetlight glow hit the bulging milk bottle on the shelf. The cap still curved slightly, reflecting a faint golden line. I whispered softly, like closing a chapter. Pressure is only dangerous when you try to keep it in. When you let it out the right way, it becomes justice. The next morning, the sterilization line stopped. The steady hum vanished, replaced by flashing red alarms pulsing like a seizure. No one understood what was happening, only that the faint smell of scorched milk was spreading through the plant. From the third floor I watched, coffee still in hand. The QC staff were panicking, the shift engineer shouting into his radio. System halt, authorization mismatch. Exactly as I expected. When a signature is withdrawn, the internal system automatically locks all outbound shipments. No one, not even Grant, could bypass that without violating FDA protocol. 3 minutes later, Marie burst into the conference room, breathless. Grant wants you downstairs. They found your letter. The conference room didn't look like it did during the promotion ceremony. No champagne, no laughter, just the sound of paper being slammed onto a table. Grant stood at the head of it, face flushed red, the opened envelope in his fist. Chloe sat beside him, mascara streaked, eyes wet. My food safety memo lay on the table, the blue line of handwriting. Authorization withdrawn, standing out like a cut on steel. You're trying to destroy this company? Grant hissed through his teeth. I set my coffee down and answered evenly. No, I'm just not signing off when it isn't safe. He slammed his palm against the table, the sound like a cap bursting. You realize this could draw FDA attention. They could suspend the entire plant. I know. That's why I withdrew my signature. The company attorney, Vaughn, sitting in the corner, flipping through papers, spoke in a hoarse voice. Legally speaking, she's within her rights. No one can sign in her place unless recertified under FDA supervision. The room fell silent. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Chloe finally spoke, her voice trembling. You could have just warned me first. I wasn't used to the process yet. I looked at her. For a second, I saw myself 3 years ago, naive enough to think honesty was built into every system. Chloe, I did warn you. You just didn't listen. Grant stepped closer, his breath sharp with coffee and anger. Who do you think you are? I smiled, steady, my voice quiet. I think I'm the only person in this room who still remembers the rules. His mouth twitched, like he wanted to speak but couldn't. I stood, pushed my chair in neatly. If I stayed quiet, that error would end up in someone's milk, then in someone's body. I chose to speak. Chloe started crying. Not the kind of crying from embarrassment, but the kind that comes when you finally understand the weight of a signature. She looked down at the file, her finger tracing the note I'd written. Temperature deviation, pending verification. Tears landed exactly on the blue ink. Grant turned to Vaughn, voice shaking with fury. Fix it. Override her authorization. Vaughn shook his head. I can't. The system's locked. If we alter it, that's federal record tampering. The FDA will catch it. Grant cursed, raising his arm like he might throw the file, but instead he exhaled, gripping the table, eyes red. I looked at him, not angry anymore, just tired. We both knew the same thing. The game had changed sides, and the law no longer favored those who called themselves flexible. I picked up my coffee, swirled it gently. Half left, enough for a farewell. Grant, I know you're proud of your family leadership, but the FDA code doesn't have the name Mercer in it. I turned to Chloe, my tone softening. It's okay. System errors can be fixed. Moral ones take longer. You still have time to decide which one you'll fix first. She nodded slightly, tears darkening her collar. I turned and walked out. My heels hit the concrete floor, echoing against the walls, blending with the sirens still blinking outside the production hall. The sterilizers restarted in safe mode, their low hum steady again, more precise than people. Before we continue, if you've ever been called too strict just for doing your job right, hit that like button, because what happens next will make you smile. I left the building. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. Only the wind hissed across the parking lot, carrying the faint scent of warm milk still clinging to my lab coat. Behind me, the entire line remained frozen, waiting for a signature that no longer existed. I opened my car door, sat down, hands rested on the wheel. The sun was rising slowly, light spilling across the windshield in a clean white streak, just like the sterilization line on the factory blueprint. Precise, sterile, emotionless. But this time, it meant freedom. I started the engine and looked into the rearview mirror. The building shrank behind me, its red warning lights still flashing. Each pulse is like a breath of justice, quiet, steady, and perfectly timed. 1 week later, I got the call at 6 in the morning while making coffee and helping Caleb adjust his new prosthetic leg. The woman's voice on the other end was calm, professional, and carried that friendly Midwestern tone. Hello, this is Rebecca Morgan, HR Director at Morningvale Dairy in Minnesota. We heard about your signature withdrawal, and actually, that's why I'm calling. I froze for a second. Good reason or bad? She laughed softly. Around here, integrity isn't a crime. We need people who do what's right, even if it means walking away from the table. Her voice felt like someone had opened a window in a room I'd been suffocating in for 3 years. Rebecca continued, Would you be able to fly to Minnesota this Thursday? We're looking for a director of food safety compliance. I've read your technical report from last year at Dairy Pure. It wasn't just precise, it had humanity. I smiled. I never thought anyone would call a microbiology report human. Because it was, she said. You wrote about the people who'd drink that milk. Most people just write about standards. 2 days later, I was on a small plane cutting through gray-white clouds over Minnesota, staring down at the snow-covered fields. I'd never seen the sky look so bright, cold, but clear. The Morningvale headquarters wasn't big, but it was warm and smelled like real milk, not the sharp sweetness of chemical disinfectant. Rebecca greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes the color of cold steel, bright and steady. We've read your file. And to be honest, Nora, we're not looking for someone agreeable. We're looking for someone unshakable, I smiled. Then I'm exactly where I belong. The interview took place in a small, wood-paneled room. No screens, no slides. Just me, Rebecca, and Mark, the CEO of Morningvale. He asked one question. If a batch could save quarterly revenue but carries a 0.01% safety risk, what do you do? I said, I pull the batch, because that 0.01% could be 100% for the first child who drinks the wrong bottle. Mark nodded, a faint smile forming on his weathered face. Good. Around here, we don't measure risk in dollars. That night, I stayed at a small hotel by the Mississippi River. The wind from the lake stung my skin, but I kept the window open. The email came at 9:12 p.m. Subject: Offer letter, Morningvale Dairy. Position: Director of Food Safety Compliance. Effective, immediately upon acceptance. I read it 4 times. Not out of surprise, but because of the strange relief it brought. a place where safety didn't need defending. I typed my reply. I accept. Thank you for believing integrity still matters. A week later, Caleb, Emma, and I moved to Minnesota. The little house we rented sat near a dairy farm. Every morning, the sound of cowbells and delivery trucks replaced the car horns of Albuquerque. For the first time in years, I heard real laughter in our kitchen. Caleb began walking again, slow but steady. Emma cheered every step he took. "Dad, you're amazing!" He smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead, then looked at me. Maybe I should send the FDA a thank you card. If it weren't for them, you'd never have found where you belong. I laughed. You're ridiculous. No, really. At Dairy Pure, they called you stubborn. Here, they call you the backbone. That made me pause. I liked the way that sounded. On my first day at Morningvale, Rebecca took me to the inspection room. It was bright and clean. Everyone greeted each other by name, no titles. A small sign on the wall read, "Integrity is a food ingredient." I stood there for a few seconds, silent. Maybe, after everything, this was where I should have started all along. That afternoon, I met with the QA team. A young engineer asked, "Is it true you once shut down an entire production line for a 0.5 degree deviation?" 0.48, actually, I said, and that's why I'm still alive in this industry. The room burst into laughter. For the first time, it wasn't mocking. That night, I came home and saw Caleb standing, without holding onto the wall. "See that?" he said, voice trembling with pride. I nodded, eyes stinging. "You did it." Emma ran over, hugging us both. Now both my parents know how to stand. We laughed. A full, real laugh. When they fell asleep, I stayed up in the small office by the window. Outside, the lights from the Morningvale plant glowed faintly. Milk steam rose into thin, white clouds. I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 34, rehired with integrity intact. Then set the pen down, watching the reflection in the glass. This wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity. The next morning, Rebecca met me at the door. "They'd like you to present your verification first model," she said. "Looks like they want to make it the statewide standard." I walked into the boardroom. No raised glasses, no fake smiles, just people who actually listened. Grant once said I was too rigid. Here, they call it the backbone of the dairy industry. At the end of the day, I drove past snow-covered fields. The sun set late, its orange glow melting over the white like liquid milk. I pulled over, rolled the window down, and let the cold air in. No hum of machinery, just the distant sound of cows and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I thought of that bulging milk bottle from years ago. It was still packed in a box I'd brought with me. The silver lid slightly curved, a reminder that some things, if left unchecked, will explode. But this time I wasn't afraid, because now I knew, here, when pressure builds, people don't hide from it. They fix it. Snow began to fall as I drove. On the radio, someone was talking about the importance of public trust in food safety. I smiled and whispered, "Justice doesn't need noise, it just needs precision." My car rolled down the snowy road, leaving 2 clean tire tracks behind, clear and firm, like a signature, and this time I knew it was one I'd never have to withdraw. 1 month later, I was standing in Morningvale's inspection room, white light reflecting off rows of clear milk bottles, when the computer screen lit up with a headline, "FDA launches investigation into Dairy Pure Foods over possible listeria contamination in 8 states." Beneath it was a familiar image, the building with the Milk Drop logo and the slogan, "Excellence through Family Leadership." And near the bottom, a small line, "Internal sources reveal the investigation began after a food safety memo was filed by the company's inspection division." I didn't need to read further. I knew exactly which memo that was, the food safety memo I'd written, now publicly cited in an FDA investigation file. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed. Caller ID, Grant Mercer. I stared at it for a few seconds, then picked it up. Grant. His voice was low, hoarse, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Nora, I know this has gone too far. The FDA has seized 3 shipments in Houston and Denver. The press says there was an internal leak. Can you help me manage this crisis? I closed my eyes, took a slow breath. Grant, I already helped. You just didn't listen. I know. I know I was wrong, but the company's in trouble. They want to talk to the person who wrote that report. Then congratulations. For the first time in your life, they finally want to listen to me. Silence on the line, only the faint hum of air conditioning. Nora, he said quietly, can I come to Minnesota to see you? No need. My answer's still the same. Safety isn't optional. I hung up. The next day, the Wall Street Ledger ran a 2-page article. Dairy Pure recalls 2.3 million units after safety managers' withdrawal memo surfaces. According to internal sources, the company ignored multiple temperature deviations prior to shipment. They quoted my own words. Corrective verification is required prior to interstate distribution. A short sentence, 12 words, but enough to halt an entire corporation. That afternoon, I received an email from Chloe Mercer. Subject, I didn't know. Nora, I didn't realize it was this serious. I thought it was just a few degrees. I thought I could fix it later. Now everything's falling apart. I'm so sorry. I typed back one line. That's the problem, you didn't realize. Then added one more. Technical errors can be fixed. Negligence can't. Then I pressed send. The news spread fast. The FDA ordered recalls in 8 states. 2 children were hospitalized with intestinal infections. Thankfully, no fatalities. But that was enough to shatter Dairy Pure's decade-long illusion of absolute safety. By nightfall, every major outlet mentioned my name. Not as praise, just as a citation. Whistleblower memo. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Rebecca knocked on my office door, holding a newspaper. You're the only person I've ever seen stop a corporation with a 2-paragraph memo. I smiled. I just followed the law. They followed flexibility. Flexibility? She raised a brow. Grant used to say I was too rigid. Now the FDA says he was too flexible with data. She laughed, then sighed. The world has a cruel way of being fair. 2 days later came the FDA's public hearing. It was streamed live to millions. Grant appeared in a gray suit, hair grayer, face drawn. Behind him sat Chloe, bare-faced, clutching her folder tightly. The investigator asked, Mr. Mercer, is it true your company authorized shipments not verified under Regulation 4.2.1b? Grant stayed silent, then gave a slow, defeated nod. The split screen showed my photo, the author of the memo. Reporters called it the Clause 4.2.1b trigger. I didn't feel proud or guilty, just calm, because the data had finally spoken. That afternoon, I picked Emma up from school. Mom, my friend said you were on TV. I laughed. I just write paperwork, sweetheart. But I told them you fix grown-ups' mistakes. I looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Yeah, I guess that's another name for what I do. That evening, Caleb was watching the news replay. He looked at me, voice low but proud. You knew this would happen, didn't you? I took a sip of peppermint tea. I did. But if no one stops the line, who keeps Emma's milk safe? He nodded quietly. After a pause, he smiled. They're calling you the compliance spine. I laughed. That's fine. At Dairy Pure, they called me Iron Nora. At least here, they know steel is meant to hold things up, not block them. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls, messages, interview requests. I answered none. Instead, I opened the window and let the cold air in. Outside, snow was falling, tiny white flakes floating like frozen milk in the air. Silent, but real. Rebecca called me into her office. We just got a request from the FDA, she said. They want to use your model as the regional standard for verification. I froze. Nora, what you did didn't just save one company. It's saving the entire industry. I paused, then smiled faintly. Looks like this time, I don't have to withdraw my signature. That night, when the factory quieted down, I stood by the window. In my pocket was a newspaper clipping, the first article about the Dairy Pure recall. I folded it and slipped it into my notebook, right beneath the line I once wrote, Day 1, authorization withdrawn. No noise. just precision. Then I added, Day 45, truth confirmed, no anger, just balance. Outside, Morningvale's lights glowed against the snow like liquid milk. The sterilizers hummed through the night, steady and honest. I looked out into the white distance and whispered to myself, justice doesn't need a name, it just needs data. Then I turned off the light, leaving the room bathed in quiet, soft glow, where truth had finally spoken without anyone shouting for it. The following spring, Morningvale opened its internal quality training center, the first project I was given full authority to build from the ground up. People called it Nora's lab. I didn't object, but deep down, I knew it wasn't my lab. It was a place to pass on peace of mind, the very thing I'd spent my whole life learning the cost of. On the first day, I hung a metal plaque above the door. Integrity is a food ingredient. The words were etched deep, gleaming under the white neon light. Beneath it, I added one line by hand. If it's missing, everything else spoils. The new room smelled of steel, milk, and hope. Young engineers gathered around the testing table as I placed a temperature probe into the first milk sample. This isn't a check, I told them. It's a commitment. Every data point you record is tied to a person who'll drink this in the morning. If you forget that, everything else is just pretending. One of the young engineers asked, Aren't you afraid people will dislike you for being so strict? I smiled. Dislike is just a side effect of integrity. It's harmless, unless you let it distort the numbers. Rebecca walked by, observing quietly. You know, Nora, I think we should start a class for the executives. They need to learn what compliance really means. If they're willing to sit still and listen, I said, I'll teach for free. One afternoon, I received a letter from the FDA certifying that Morningvale had achieved zero deviation status for 12 consecutive months. Rebecca brought a glass frame and placed it on my desk. They're calling it a milestone. I shook my head. No, it's just what happens when you don't lie. Next to the frame certificate sat the National Food Safety Award trophy, and beside it, the swollen milk bottle I'd kept for over a year. I never threw it away. Every true beginning needs a crack to remind us of pressure's limits. At the award ceremony, reporters asked how I felt. 3 years ago, I said, they called me too rigid. Today, they're handing me a trophy for that same rigidity. I didn't change. The world finally adjusted its temperature. The crowd laughed, and for the first time in my career, I realized the laughter was genuine. No sarcasm, no fear. That night, I came home late. Caleb was in the living room, the lamplight glinting off his new titanium prosthetics. He gripped the chair arms, stood up, slowly but on his own. I froze. He exhaled hard, steadying himself, then smiled. I can stand now, because I married someone who never sits still. I stepped closer, holding him, eyes stinging. And I can stand because you never gave up. Emma ran out of her room, shouting, Dad's standing! Mom, look! We all laughed, bright, real, effortless. Later, when they slept, I sat at my desk, staring at the trophy and the old milk bottle side by side. One gleaming, one dull. One representing recognition, the other a lesson. I realized rebirth isn't starting over, it's revalidating yourself and passing inspection. A week later, I was invited to Washington, D.C. to speak at the Public Trust in Food Systems Conference. I opened with a line that made the audience laugh. I didn't save milk, I saved the people who drink it. And I closed with something simpler. We don't need heroes in food safety. We just need people willing to check the temperature one more time, even when no one's watching. After the talk, an older engineer approached me. I worked at Dairy Pure for 15 years, he said. If I'd had your courage, maybe things would have been different. I shook his hand. It's never too late to flip the right switch. By summer, the training center began welcoming interns. I taught them how to test pH, read deviations, and, most importantly, see ethics in numbers. One student asked, Do you think you won, now that Dairy Pure collapsed? I answered softly, I didn't win against them. I just didn't lose myself. One afternoon, I walked down the factory hallway. Through the glass panels, sunlight glinted off the stainless steel lines, steady, bright, clean. The sterilizers hummed softly, the heartbeat of a system reborn. I placed my hand on the glass, like I once had, but this time I didn't see just my reflection. I saw a whole team behind me, keeping rhythm together. That night, I opened my journal again. Beneath the line that read, Day 45, Truth Confirmed, I wrote, Day 120. Renewal achieved. No pressure. Just purpose. Then I looked at the bottle. The lid was no longer swollen. I had drilled a small hole in it, letting the air escape, a quiet ritual. Beside it, the trophy glowed under the desk lamp. Two objects side by side, a balanced equation. Outside the window, the snow was melting, revealing soft brown soil. Cows in the distant fields called out, low, long, alive. I closed my eyes, listening to that sound, and smiled. At last, I understood. I didn't need to be known. I just needed to know that people were still drinking milk safely, and still believed someone out there was checking it for them. The following autumn, news spread across every trade journal. Dairy Pure reports 40% revenue drop. CEO Grant Mercer officially steps down. No one had to explain why. Investors were done with excuses. Customers had moved on to brands they didn't have to read about in the morning recall reports. On my desk lay a thick, cream-colored envelope, my name written in black ink across the front. For Nora Whitfield. No logo, no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter, slanted, shaky, ink smudged in places. Nora, I laughed when you walked away. But now I understand. Silence isn't weakness. I thought hard work was enough, but effort can't replace integrity. When the FDA returned for reinspection, they found dozens of falsified records, the same ones I'd signed without checking. Grant lost his position, and I lost trust in myself. If there's one thing I want to say, it's this. Now I understand why you left and never looked back. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, carrying a faint scent of milk and dust. I folded it carefully. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a quiet sadness, the kind you feel for someone who could have done better, if only they'd learned sooner. 2 weeks later, I attended the National Food Safety Conference in Chicago. The ballroom was vast, softly lit, with rows of chairs aligned like a perfect assembly line. My keynote was titled, The Cost of Silence. I told my story without names, only about how one signature can either protect thousands of lives or make an entire industry bow its head. The room was silent enough that I could hear the air brushing past the microphone. When it ended, a woman approached. Wavy blonde hair, gray coat, eyes swollen. She stopped a few steps away, lips trembling. I'm not sure you want to see me, she said. I looked at her, not surprised. Chloe Mercer. I nodded. Guess you're not wearing designer perfume anymore. She gave a faint, tearful laugh. No. These days, I just smell like chlorine. We both laughed quietly, the kind that comes from shared exhaustion, not humor. We sat at a cafe near the lobby. Her cappuccino went untouched. She began, after my father resigned, he sold his shares and moved back to our old farm. I stayed to clean up the mess. There were files I had to re-sign, one by one, and every time I saw my name, I thought of you. I remembered what you said. If I stay silent, that mistake will end up in someone's milk. I said nothing. There was nothing left to add. She looked down, voice trembling. Do you hate me? I shook my head gently. No. At least you still know how to cry. That answer broke her. Tears came. Not dramatic, just real. Quiet tears, falling in a mid-afternoon cafe between two women who once stood on opposite ends of the same production line. I handed her a napkin. You know, Chloe, I said softly, in this line of work, there are two kinds of mistakes. The kind you fix with procedure and the kind you fix with conscience. You're lucky you still have both. She looked up, tears mixing with a faint smile. I'm learning again, at a small plant, and for the first time, I understand what it really means to sign off on a batch. That's the first step toward becoming an adult, I said, touching her hand lightly. When she stood, we hugged briefly, not to forgive, to close the chapter. As she walked away, she turned back and said quietly, You were right. Silence has its own sound. I can hear it now. I watched her disappear into the crowd. A small part of me trembled, not from resentment, but from regret. Regret for those who only learn after everything collapses. That afternoon, I returned to the main hall and stood before the large banner hanging behind the stage. It read, "Integrity is a food ingredient." Someone had scribbled a line beneath it in marker. "And once spoiled, it can't be pasteurized again." I smiled. Someone had understood. Maybe Chloe. That night, back at the hotel, the Chicago wind howled against the glass. I opened my notebook and wrote a new line. Day 280. They finally heard it. Not my voice, but the silence that came after. I set down my pen and looked out at the distant lights. No triumph, no vengeance, just a quiet sense of clarity, pure and steady, like milk heated exactly 15 seconds. No more, no less. And softly, almost like a closing note, I said to myself, I didn't defeat them. I just let the truth speak for itself. Dawn spread slowly across the glass roof of Morningvale. White milk vapor rose from the sterilization line, blending into the pale morning like fog. The hum of the machines was steady, honest. I still liked coming in early, when the numbers on the monitors were just waking up. I stood by the window, coffee in hand. Inside, young engineers moved between the testing trays. The metallic click of steel lids sounded clean and satisfying. No one noticed me. I preferred it that way. There was a time I thought that sound was cold. Now I know it's the truest sound there is. Machines don't flatter. They don't lie. They just do what they were programmed to do. Something humans often forget. I rested my hand on the glass and whispered, not needing anyone to hear. We don't sign for money. We sign for the person who'll drink that morning glass of milk. Turns out, what keeps the world safe isn't the massive assembly line. It's the people brave enough to stop it when they must. Far down the hall, Emma ran with her lunchbox, smiling at the security guard. Caleb was in HR, brewing peppermint tea, a small daily ritual that turned his scars into part of his life. He once joked, "You keep the milk from spoiling. I keep your smile from doing the same." This morning, watching the steam curl from his cup, I knew he meant it. On the corner of my desk sat the old, swollen milk bottle, 2 seasons past. The lid still curved, sunlight glinting through the glass. I kept it as a reminder. Every system needs a moral boundary. Beside it stood the food safety trophy. One polished, one flawed, but both real. Together they said the same thing. Without ethics, there is no safety. I opened the log of conscience. The pages were yellowed, but the blue ink was still bold. Beneath the line that read, Day 280, they finally heard it, I wrote, Day 365, balance achieved. No noise, just purpose. I closed the notebook and murmured, safety doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be right. Morning light brushed across my face, soft but clear. I was no longer the fighter. I was the one who'd found calm after the storm. On the wall hung a wooden plaque. This wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity. I read it each time I passed, not as comfort, but as truth. Being dismissed was just another chance to recertify myself. Next to it, carved into the wood, another line, some bridges once burned stay ash. I used to fear the bridge I burned. Now I understand. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, because the other side isn't worth returning to. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Emma's voice followed, and Caleb called from the tea room. Honey, is the water hot yet? Almost. Just like me every time the line runs on spec. He laughed. Still sarcastic, huh? Of course. It keeps the system from cooling down. We both laughed. The sound blended with the hum of the machines. Steady, rhythmic, alive. I lifted the old milk bottle. The metal cap was cold against my fingers. I set it on the shelf near the window where the light struck strongest. The soft white glow across the wall looked like a breath. I stared at it one last time, calm inside. No one's perfect, but at least we can be precise. Outside, the Morningvale line ran smoothly, not out of fear, not out of pressure, but because everyone understood why their work mattered. I inhaled deeply, the scent of warm milk, peppermint tea, steel, and sunlight. The smell of a day done right. I thought of everyone, somewhere out there, who'd been called too rigid, Too difficult, not flexible enough. And I spoke into the quiet. If you've ever been overlooked just for doing the right thing, this story was for you. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you still believe integrity matters, hit subscribe, because somewhere out there, another Nora needs to hear this. I glanced at the small camera on the desk, the one recording my ethics series for students. The golden light washed softly over my face. I took a slow sip of coffee and said the final line, clear and steady. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to stay steady, like the hum of a sterilizer. The only sound that remained was that steady hum, the heartbeat of integrity itself.